So this is from another recent study and headline that was widely publicized in the news. And they cover a study that had the headline of "Swaddling and SIDS, Why Scary Headlines Got It Wrong." And some of the headlines that came out from this study were "Swaddling babies is tied to heightened risk of sudden infant death syndrome," and "Swaddling may increase the risk of SIDS." This I see as like a classic case of fear-mongering. And I'm a parent. I don't know how many of you have young children. The sort of awareness that's been raised about putting your kids on their backs to sleep, making sure that you're minimizing it, or eliminating any loose objects in your cribs. Parents are going to look at every single headline that has SIDS in it because they don't want to lose their child. This in terms of ratings, and as I mentioned, this is kind of borrowed from the system that Gary at Health News Review came up with. I would give these headlines a 1 on his rating scale. Again, that's because they, one, aren't accurate. Again, this wasn't a randomized controlled study. It was an analysis of existing data from a bunch of different studies that had all different parameters and definitions of SIDS, let alone different types of swaddling that were used in the studies. But Gary does come up with a suggested headline here. So, "Swaddling weakly linked to slight increase in SIDS risk." And you might think, who's going to read that, right? But Gary found this story through a Facebook post from a friend of his who's a parent who was feeling really frustrated that no matter what she did, swaddle, not swaddle, start solids at 6 months, wait until a year, everything that you do, there's a contradicting study that just makes you feel like you're an awful parent. Honestly, something like that, I would click on it because it's kind of reassuring. It's showing that, yes, there's not something definitive here that I can rely on as a parent, and yet, I'm going to actually look and see what was done in that study, and hope that I see things here that, one, there's nothing that's going to change the current practice. So what I've been doing, I can keep doing, and that's reassuring. So. I think that you don't always have control over what the headline says. You can often really have a lot of control in helping to shape what's included in an article, or at least help to make sure that statements are correct. Somebody goes and writes an article and has absolutely no input, interaction, or comment from the organization that put the research out. They're going to write based on their own best guesses, or they're going to go to other researchers and ask for their interpretation, which may or may not be correct. So at the very least, by providing your interpretation of the results, you will hopefully have some correct statements within the body of the story that can help with the accuracy and the takeaway for people who read it. Again, I think by working really hard to try to come up with headlines that are responsibly written, but short and somewhat clicky, as they say with the online headlines. Again, I think maybe we can help kind of shift to better headlines, or show that you can get clicks for something that's written well. It's not going to change it 100%, and yet I think being aware of it is important. You can ask questions back to the reporter. You're not the one who has to do all the answering. After you provide information, ask the reporter, it's important to me that you get this right. Can you reflect back to me your takeaway from what I just said? And have them look at their notes and try to summarize it back to you. Reporters are often recording your interview. I recommend saying back to the reporter, no problem, I'm going to record it as well for my records. And that way you have sort of a record of what was asked and what you said. And when the article comes out, if they got it wrong, if they're mischaracterizing what you said, don't let it lie, like ask for a correction. That's really, really important. So let's look at another example for headline writing. And here I'm picking, this was an entire press release that Gary and his team picked as a 5-star rating. And this was a study done by Children's Hospital of Philadelphia in gene therapy for factor VII deficiency. And the headline was, "Gene Therapy for Rare Bleeding Disorder Achieves Proof of Concept." The subhead was, "CHOP researcher leads study of factor VII deficiency in dog model, shows long-term correction, safety, and efficacy." So some of the highlights here in why this was pointed out as a great study, and I'm not going to get into that full rating here, so I encourage you to go online and find this press release and the blog and the review that Health News Review did on it, because you can see all of the rating criteria on why they gave it a 5-star rating. But highlights of this are, one, the use of proof of concept. So proof of concept has very, very different meanings to lots of different people, but it at least says like it's not ready for prime time yet, that it was only proof of sort of one step in the process for the treatment. You know, there's a lot of controversy about putting in headlines sort of specific models, you know, used in research, animal models, and, you know, naming dogs, because there's a lot of activists out there. But here they were upfront about the fact that this research was done in dogs, not humans. So again, like if you're a venture capitalist, to them, proof of concept means it cleared phase 2 studies. So here they're providing the specific context that this was done in an animal model. And that, you know, again, it kind of helps define also what proof of concept meant for these researchers in that subhead. So the long-term correction, the safety, the efficacy. And when you go in and read the press release, it actually doesn't provide a ton of detail on the methods or a ton of numbers, but it does define what long-term means to them, what safety parameters would have meant it wasn't safe. So, you know, again, that's, you know, something to see it being done right. It's positive, but it's pretty down to earth and grounded in terms of the research that was actually done.